I've only ever shared the story with one person, my therapist, after my best friend's death. His reaction was to tell my mom that I might be experiencing trauma-induced psychosis. Since then, I've only told altered versions of this story, but here, I feel free to share it as it truly happened because we're all sharing stories, right? High school was a great time for me. I had plenty of friends and experienced everything a typical teenager could want. But one event cast a shadow over all those memories. Jason had been my best friend since we met in 4th grade. That bond grew as we discovered we both had June birthdays. From 4th grade until the end of 10th, we spent at least 2 days a week together outside of school, and we often hung out in larger groups too. We shared many interests, but more importantly, he was someone I could always turn to, a true friend. One shared hobby was riding dirt bikes. Although we lived in a fairly populated town, we were surrounded by vast forests filled with winding trails. Each summer, we'd ride those paths, typically sticking to well-traveled areas to avoid getting lost. So I was surprised when Jason suggested we bike to Tillsville on a particularly warm Friday morning, just 2 weeks after school ended for summer. Tillsville, not its real name for safety reasons, is a deserted mining town nestled in the woods against one of the mountains. There were no urban legends about it, but people generally avoided the place, worried they might wander into the mines and get hurt. While it was common for people to visit the town for parties, we usually preferred to hang out with friends who had parents that would let them throw their own gatherings. I was hesitant about going because I didn't think it would be particularly interesting. "Why do you want to go there?" I asked. Jason seemed convinced it would be cool to change up our route. He even promised to buy pizza that night if I agreed to go, which, of course, sealed the deal for me. The forest trails were beautiful, but as we ventured deeper, the paths became less distinct, making it easier to get lost. To gauge our ride to Tillsville on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the well-marked paths near the timberline and 10 being the single cabin in the woods for lost hikers, I'd say it was about a 6. The ride went smoothly, and on our way, we bumped into Anna, a mutual friend from school, who was walking her dog. We chatted for a few minutes about studying for our driving tests, since she had a May birthday but hadn't prepared for hers yet. As we got closer to Tillsville, Jason took the lead. He mentioned he had been studying the routes to the town over the past week. When we finally spotted the lookout tower peeking above the trees, he whooped in excitement. This was my first time visiting Tillsville. I'd heard descriptions and seen photos, but experiencing it in person was entirely different. The town was divided into 2 sections, the residential area and the mining site. The neighborhood consisted of about 12 homes in various states of decay. Jason rode straight up to the nearest house, and before I could dismount my bike, he was already inside. As I followed him in, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. The small house was dilapidated, but still showed signs of having once been loved. "Check this out," Jason called, pointing to a picture frame. We were shocked to see a family photo of a father in mining gear with what appeared to be his wife and daughter. It was bewildering to think someone had left such a meaningful item behind. As we explored other houses, we noticed beer cans, cigarette butts, and even used condoms. It became clear that families had left in a hurry, abandoning items that seemed significant. There were no urban legends about Tillsville, but its history was tragic. The mine had closed in the mid-70s, and while it was never hugely profitable, it employed about 40 people, many of whom lived nearby. Losing both jobs and homes at once created desperation. One story went that on the second-to-last day of work, as miners discussed severance pay and how to reach out to landowners, a fight broke out, resulting in the foreman and another senior miner being beaten. One miner, who later gave a media interview, spoke of being haunted by how the kind, gentle men he knew suddenly turned into violent beasts out of frustration. Back to our visit. In the last house we explored, we rummaged through an old gym bag left in the bathroom. I pulled out a massive Crocodile Dundee-style Bowie knife. Jason jokingly swatted at the blade, acting like a fool. But then he suddenly froze, wide-eyed, and said, "I think someone might be out there." I looked where he was staring but saw nothing. Just then, Jason snatched the knife from my hand and bolted out of the house. What the heck? I yelled, chasing after him as he rushed to the back of a neighboring house. He slowed down when we reached the corner and gave me a tense look. I nodded, and together we turned the corner, both inhaling sharply at the sight of an empty, overgrown backyard. What did you think you saw? I asked. A person? An animal? It doesn't matter, Jason replied. We should get out of here. He answered my question without really addressing it, regaining his usual silly composure. It struck me as odd that he just ignored what I had asked, but wanting to keep the peace, I dropped the topic and we headed toward the mine. The remains of the mining area included a rickety lookout, half of a factory, a storage shed, and the head frame. There was also an entry point into the mine, and it showed just how reckless some people in our town could be. The walls meant to keep folks out had been torn down. I was curious about the factory and head frame, but Jason was making a beeline for the mine entrance. You really want to go in there? I asked, trying to keep pace with him. I mean, my brother went to a party inside last year. It's not like it's going to collapse the moment we step in. Dude, now that you've said that, that's exactly what will happen, he replied, not breaking his stride. As we got closer to the entrance, I felt an unexplainable tension in the air. It wasn't exactly danger, but it felt heavy. I held my breath as we crossed the threshold, and looking back, I have to admit that, after the first few steps, being inside the mine was pretty fascinating. My brain screamed danger, yet I found myself enjoying it. The first 30 feet or so were a straight shot. We hopped around the tracks on the floor, even competing to see who could balance on the edge of the tracks the longest. Then, the mine split into 3 paths. The first 2 sloped down, with wooden and stone steps leading into pitch darkness. Even though Jason had brought a couple of flashlights, they seemed inadequate against the overwhelming gloom. The third path was short, leading to a large, empty stone room that must have served as a break area. I stepped into the room before Jason could pull me back. It was sizable but sadly cluttered with debris and graffiti. Gross! Jason shouted, staring at the floor. I felt a jolt of irritation at his reaction. His shout nearly made my heart stop. Jason bent down and picked something up. This must be Mark's, he said, holding up a beer bottle, an IPA I'd only ever seen Mark drink. Show it to Mark to prove we were actually here, I said, trying to stall for time. I even started talking about the upcoming football season, Jason's favorite topic, to delay going further into the mine. As we left the room, Jason completely ignored my left turn toward the straight path, fumbling with his backpack as he headed down the right slope. I sighed, unwilling to let my reckless friend get lost. He had stuffed his backpack full, including the knife we'd just found, so the flashlights were buried at the bottom. As he rummaged through the bag, I thought I heard something sliding on the stone steps about 50 feet down. Sure, I said, grabbing his arm to stop him. Ignoring me, Jason pulled out his biggest flashlight and shone it down the path. To my relief, there was nothing there. See? It's nothing, you big baby, he said, grabbing another flashlight and handing it to me as we continued downward. I was surprised by how damp everything smelled, even though the stone around us looked dry. You know Anna is literally the only person who knows we're down here, I said nervously as we descended further. She talks a lot. We agreed to see her tomorrow. She'll call someone if we don't show, Jason replied. I wasn't entirely convinced. While we were in one of the houses earlier, I had used a social media app to check in, planning to delete it once we were out. After about 3 minutes of walking, I heard a sound that definitely wasn't coming from us. It seemed like there was another fork in the tunnel, and the noise was coming from the right side. It didn't sound like the sliding noise I heard before. It was more like running water. I froze, hoping the sound would fade away so as not to alarm Jason, but he clearly heard it because he started moving toward it. As he rushed ahead, I turned to the left and saw the words, "There's nothing for you down here," spray-painted on the opposite wall. Man, we really need to, I started to say, but Jason had already reached the next fork and was looking around the bend toward the noise. What happened next felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's experience. Jason spun around and shouted in a voice I didn't think could come from the bulky right tackle of our varsity team. As he was making his way up the steps, another sound filled the mine, a noise I can only describe as akin to throwing a cat into an industrial shredder. My body went into autopilot. As we neared the top, I could hear something or someone following us, its steps heavy and capable of leaping multiple steps at once. I'm not sure how, but we managed to reach the mine's exit without looking back. However, an issue arose. Jason's backpack got caught on a torn section of the wall. Somehow, he slipped free, and in no time, we were on our bikes, racing away from town. The next 40 minutes were nerve-wracking as we sped through the forest at 15 to 20 miles per hour, still feeling like whatever was in that mine was right behind us, ready to pounce. When we finally emerged from the trees, we stopped to catch our breath. I was close to losing it, overwhelmed by what had just happened. "What on earth was that?" I asked. "You're not going to like my answer," he replied, frowning. I was angry, though I couldn't quite understand why. It didn't make sense to be upset, but I was terrified. "What do you mean you don't know? You're the one who told me to run." "Yeah, I did, but man, I have no idea what it was," he admitted. "I just knew it was bad." He shivered as he spoke, the color draining from his face as he tried to process what had just occurred. I was about to ask for more details when Jason continued, "My bag, was there anything important in it?" "Just the mail I grabbed from the box before we left. It was a certificate saying I'd completed my community service for social studies. I can just call and ask for another one." For some reason, the fact that the only negative consequence of our terrifying trip into that dangerous mine was the loss of a certificate struck me as hilarious, and I burst out laughing. Jason sat there, stone-faced, clearly annoyed. It was like he had plunged into the quickest depression imaginable. As we played Rocket League, I glanced over to see him on the verge of tears. "Jason, what's wrong?" He suddenly hurled his controller onto the ground in a flash of anger. "Why didn't you stop me from going down there? I did everything I could to get us out of there without a fight." "I didn't want to be the one to make you quit something you clearly wanted to do," I replied. He stood up, fists clenched, and it scared me. But then he realized what he was doing, took a deep breath, and apologized, looking like he could never be happy again that night. I mostly played on my phone while Jason sat on the couch, seeming distant. I tried to engage him a few times, but he barely responded. I didn't want to leave him alone, so I stayed quiet until he eventually passed out. Hours later, I was jolted awake, violently shaken. The sleep vanished from my eyes as I saw Jason looking down at me, terrified. I was about to ask what he was doing when he put a finger to his lips and pointed to the window. Someone was knocking relentlessly on his second-story window. Like him, I was frozen in fear. The knocking wasn't aggressive, it was almost enchanting. After about 30 seconds, the knocking finally stopped, replaced by an even more terrifying sound. "Jason, don't you want to check it out?" Each word it spoke sounded distorted, as if it was coming from different radio stations all at once. After a long pause, Jason, who had retreated to the couch, turned toward me. I'll never forget his expression. My best friend looked as if he had just been told his mother had died. I tried to sit up, but everything happened too fast. It felt like I was watching myself in a movie. First, the window shattered, the blinds ripped away, and the room lit up unnaturally, like a flashbang had gone off. Jason screamed in terror, using the same tone he had when he told me to run in the mine. Then came that awful noise again, a high-pitched metallic wail. Suddenly, I saw a boot, or maybe a paw, coming toward my face. Then, everything went black. When I regained consciousness, everything was red and my eyes burned. As I cleared the blood from them, I saw Jason's parents standing in the doorway, staring at the far wall and screaming, though I couldn't hear them over the sound of my broken nose crunching as I moved. I followed their gaze to where the broken window and the wall were soaked in blood. Before I could process the scene, I lost consciousness again. They never found Jason. The amount of blood in the room all but confirmed he was dead. I was considered a suspect for a day or so, but Jason's mother told the police that she had checked on us about 15 minutes before she and Jason's father heard what they described as a cyclone hit their home. There wasn't nearly enough time for me to have killed Jason, thrown his body through the window, and hidden it somewhere. The prevailing theory among the local police was that intruders, people we might have seen committing a crime in town, broke into Jason's house, brutally attacked me, killed him, and carried his body out the front door. They believed the broken window was a distraction of some kind. That day, I gave my account of what happened at least 3 times. Eventually, the investigator grew so frustrated that he left for 45 minutes, returning with a rolled-up sheet of paper. "Kid," he said, unrolling it. "Look." It was a map of the mine, made shortly before it was shut down. The investigator traced the mine's paths with his finger, specifically the area where I said Jason had seen something. There was no second fork in that part of the mine, just a complete downward slope. I had a good high school experience, but Jason's death cast a shadow over my happiness. Now I live in a different state, yet I still keep in touch with Jason's parents, trying my best to be the son they lost. The most frustrating and bewildering thing about this whole situation is that I've heard people have since held parties in that mine. It might sound terrible, but why are they alive? Why did I have to lose my best friend?